Hello, I am going to do a drawing tutorial video here, uh, generally about measuring proportions and transferring those proportions to a drawing. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about the concept or the skill called triangulation. And it's a fun word to say. Say it with me, triangulation. But kidding aside, it's a very powerful technique and tool that when I remember to actually slow down and use it, I find to be extremely helpful. So I'm going to talk about that. And just as a couple quick examples, it's the idea that when you're trying to draw something, that one of the important things is to identify significant points in whatever it is you happen to be drawing, and then using those points to imagine a triangle between those points. And I'll explain why, a couple of reasons why that's a really powerful thing. But you can use it both big picture and starting out something that you're drawing, as well as when you start getting into really fine details, something like this. I might imagine what that triangle is, which is going to help. So, and for just for example, if it was an actual live object, I would think about 3 points and I would imagine the triangle that 3 points would make. And then I would start combining that triangle with another triangle. And then by combining those, it's a really cool thing. So cool. And why is it so cool? Well, first I'm going to try to convince you that it's because triangles are magical. That may be literally kind of true, but if I think of any 3 points to create some kind of triangle, if I take this triangle and I happen to draw an additional line that's parallel, the same angle as that, I've just created a new triangle that is the same proportions as my original triangle. And that is true for any side. So if I draw a line, for example, like that's parallel to this edge, every triangle in here is going to be proportional and similar. Won't be the exact dimensions, but it will be the same proportions as my original. So now this is the same, not the same, but same proportions as that, which is the same proportions as that one. So, etc., etc. And that's true for any edge. So one thing I have that I practice and I have my students practice is first just kind of play with that idea that really if I can kind of copy the angles of these lines, that I can pretty quickly draw something, get an idea of the basic proportions of something, and then move on with the drawing. I got stuck there. But so this, when I say triangles are magical, this is not, it's not true for a four-sided object. If I have a four-sided object that I'm wanting to replicate and draw, I could nail the angles of these edges, but still not create something that's in the actual proportion of that object. And I'll try to make that extremely obvious, perhaps. So hopefully you can see that even though I'm not spending too much time making sure these angles are exact, but the point is that the proportions of this original object is quite different than the proportions of this object, even though the angles are similar. So this fits in something in a rectangle that's a little bit wider than it is tall, and this one fits in something that's taller than it is wide. So the proportionality, consistency of a triangle is one of the reasons why this is a good technique. So what I practice and what I have my students practice is, first of all, just getting this idea of creating some sort of triangle. And I will then create a bounding frame around said triangle. And by doing that, I have conveniently created 3 additional negative shape triangles, which I find when I'm trying to draw this negative triangle and this negative triangle and this one is even more helpful than trying to think about what this specific triangle is, because that's a whole nother big discussion. But by doing that and then trying to replicate that triangle in a larger overall dimension, but once again will be proportionally the same as the original, if I can get these angles right. And one of the ways I'm going to make sure that I'm trying to get these angles right is then by imagining this triangle. And really what this is about is it's hard to know what, you can talk about angles, but until you sort of clarify what it is you're comparing the angle to, it's kind of a moot. It's just, you need context to understand the angle of something. So that's really what this negative shape triangle is doing. So let me see if I can bring this one to some sort of replication and prove my point. See, already I think this triangle is decently like that one, but I could tell that this one was not that close. And I really didn't know that until I started comparing it with the vertical. So that's closer. Now let's check out this one. Seems a little, this still seems a little, this one I'm going to scooch over a little bit like that. Maybe make you even a little bit more like that. And this one is, this edge is longer than that edge. And when I'm looking at this, they seem pretty darn close to me. So I want to make it so that it's a little bit more like that. And to get even more accuracy, which is helpful to be able to choose to do when you're drawing. Can also just break up this rectangle into smaller rectangles based on these points. And then I can start comparing that rectangle to this rectangle, this one to this one, and that to that, etc., etc. I'm going to just do this in a smaller version. I would, if this was an actual drawing, I would spend more time doing that, but I'm really trying to practice the skill and not worry about creating a drawing, a quote-unquote drawing. I think one of the things gets kind of glossed over or not discussed as much as I feel like it should be is trying to separate learning a specific skill from the act of using that skill to create a piece of art. That's a nice long discussion. But here I'm just trying to create a smaller version. And I'm looking at that triangle and that triangle and that triangle, and it's close. I feel like I've done the same thing here. This one is and I would spend a little bit of time trying to get that accurate in the same proportions as my original. And I can see that this rectangle seems like it's a little bit, this one right here is a little bit wider and shorter than that one. So this is all practicing comparing and building my eye, strengthening the ability of my eye to judge and replicate proportions and angles of lines. That's a nice messy thing, but I would say do that over and over and over again. Pages and pages. And then once you feel like you've kind of gotten an idea of how to do this, sometimes I even start off with trying to just draw that negative shaped rectangle because, I'm sorry, triangle. So once I started that and didn't finish, but get so this is really comfortable and just sort of easy, and you can sort of do it without thinking about it, and then try to apply that to something that you're drawing. But like I said, I wouldn't try to learn the skill while you're trying to draw something because you're just juggling too many things. And this is sort of a great example. I might think of, if I was trying to create a triangle with this and this, and say this point. I was trying something earlier, but that is getting confusing. It would be easy to just sort of think, okay, well that's basically a straight up, and if I was just trying to draw this without thinking of that triangulation, it would be pretty easy to think of this line as basically just kind of straight up and down. And it's going to be really important to understand that indeed this is at an angle like that, and relative to that straight up and down, that's going to help me understand. There's a, it's maybe not the best choice because it's hard to see, but regardless of what it is that I'm trying to draw, I'll be using this idea. You know, if it's something like this, I might choose that point and that point and that point and think about what kind of, when I'm trying to make sure that my proportions are somewhat accurate, I can think about that triangle, and then I can think about that triangle, etc., etc. I find it particularly helpful, actually, with ellipses. Anyways, practice that a bunch. Send questions if you have them. And have fun.